Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. On the channel, I have been researching turbo upgrades for my 2021 A90 Supra with the Gen 2 B58. This upgrade is going to be required for me to reach my goal of a 600 horsepower street car. Additionally, subscribers have been asking me questions about various turbo options and what I would recommend. So I did a deep dive on turbos that I was considering for my build. In my previous video, I looked at the new Pure 800 and Pure 900 turbos, but in this video, I want to look at the new gen turbos from Dynamic Autowerx. Before starting with technical specifications on these turbos, I think it's important for us to know what we're replacing. The OEM turbocharger is a twin scroll design and has been known to be able to support up to anywhere between 500 and 550 horsepower. Of course, these numbers are using a race fuel or a meth injection or a higher E-content fuel. All the turbos before the new gen turbos from Dynamic Autowerx were based on OEM turbochargers. Dynamic Autowerx were boring out OEM turbochargers and installing larger components to increase the turbocharger's performance. But these turbos were always restricted to the boundaries of the dimensions of the OEM turbocharger. To get away from this limitation, Dynamic Autowerx had the goal of maintaining a stock location turbo that used factory-style intakes and factory-style downpipes while increasing capability and reliability of their upgraded turbos. The new gen turbos from Dynamic Autowerx, which include the UltraFlow X, the 6466, the 6769, they use new compressor and turbine housing. So these are no-core turbos. These are brand new turbos. Starting with the UltraFlow X, this turbo replaces the older UltraFlow Turbo series. Dynamic Autowerx says in their test cars, they were able to achieve a spool of turbo up to 35 psi at only 2,900 RPM. Additionally, they say the UltraFlow X is capable of supporting up to 730 horsepower and has a power band from the mid-2000s up to 7,000 RPM. They promote this turbo as a good street turbo, but also good for road racing. They say it doesn't just make a peak horsepower number early in the power band and then falter as it runs out of volume. They said that this turbo is able to spool quickly, but then maintain power across the power band. Moving on to the new 6466 and 6769, Dynamic Autowerx says that these are their larger turbo offerings that maintain great drivability, great throttle response, good spool, and also a very broad overall power and torque curve. Dynamic Autowerx claims that both of these turbos drive like a smaller turbo. They say it has a perfect combination of low end, mid, and then an upper range that pulls like a freight train. The new Gen 6466 is rated up to 800 horsepower, and the new Gen 6769 is rated up to 875 plus horsepower. Dynamic Autowerx promotes the 6769 as a perfect turbo to get big power numbers on 93 octane pump gas. It makes sense that this turbo has the capability of supporting over 600 wheel horsepower on 93 octane pump gas with the appropriate supporting mods. All of these new gen turbos from Dynamic Autowerx uses an upgraded thrust bearing, still going in a factory style journal bearing center section. They also say that these turbos are VSR balanced or vibration sorting rig balanced. This helps promote longevity of the turbo, increasing bearing life of the turbo. So now I want to get into the size of these turbos. I'm going to compare them to the new Pure 800 and the Pure 900 plus the OEM turbocharger. The OEM turbocharger has a compressor wheel size of 50 millimeter on the inducer and a turbine wheel size of 50 millimeter on the exducer. The new Pure 800 has a compressor wheel size of 62 millimeters on the inducer and a turbine wheel size of 62 millimeters on the exducer. The Pure 900 has a compressor wheel size of 65 millimeter on the inducer and a turbine wheel size of 62 millimeters on the exducer, which is the same as the new Pure 800. So moving on to the Dynamic Autowerx turbos, starting with the UltraFlow X, I wasn't able to find any dimensions on the turbo. Reached out to Dynamic Autowerx. They didn't provide me with that information, but the previous UltraFlow had a compressor wheel size of 62 millimeters on the inducer and a turbine wheel size of 62 millimeters on the exducer, so similar, if not exactly the same sizing as the new Pure 800. The 6466 has a compressor wheel size of 64 millimeters on the inducer and a turbine wheel size of 66 millimeters on the exducer. So that's a substantially larger turbo than anything we've seen so far. And then the 6769 has a compressor wheel size of 67 millimeters on the inducer and a turbine wheel size of 69 millimeters on the exducer. So even larger. Both of those turbos dimensionally, except for the inducer on the 6466, kind of dwarf the size of the Pure 900. So that was all the readily available information I could find on the new gen turbos from Dynamic Autowerx. And just like in the previous video on Pure turbos, I want to give you some real world data on the power numbers people are seeing using these Dynamic Autowerx turbos. I still don't have an unlimited budget here at Grumpy Vet Garage, so I wasn't able to purchase these turbos and do testing on my own. So I had to do some data mining to get some information on these turbos. I pulled from reliable sources, posted dyno data. Granted, some of them did not come with full modification lists or in some cases even what exact fuel they were using, but this was the data that I was able to find. I placed all dyno numbers and supporting mods that I was able to find for the Dynamic Autowerx UltraFlow X and 6769 turbos. I sorted them by horsepower, but I couldn't find any data for anybody using the 6466, at least not dyno data. I also listed torque numbers, but just like I mentioned in the previous video, torque numbers are something that can be somewhat manipulated. You'll see the torque numbers, but don't look at them and be like, oh, why didn't it make more torque than this one or this? That's not really what's important. Those numbers can be manipulated. Also, before moving forward, the Dynamic Autowerx new gen turbos come in 6-port and 2-port versions. This is different from what Pure Turbos has done. Pure Turbos new Pure 800 and the Pure 900 only come in 6-port models. They're still developing a 2-port, but it is not available yet. So getting into the data, I really wasn't able to find a large amount of dyno data on the Dynamic Autowerx turbos. There is a lot more information on Pure Turbos as far as dyno numbers than there are for Dynamic Autowerx. But first, with the UltraFlow X, I found 5 documented examples of dyno data. These examples follow a similar pattern as far as upgrade path as those that people would use with the new Pure 800. These paths that I went over in the previous video is people just use a 93 octane pump, and then second was increase fueling while maintaining a stock low pressure fuel pump, and then finally fueling upgrades so they could run like higher E content. And these, of course, running higher E content would net the highest horsepower numbers using this turbo. So referring to my notes, tuning was kind of, split between MHD and boot mod. Everybody was running an intake. Some were running intake manifolds, but key thing here was nobody using the UltraFlow X did any kind of DI upgrade. So still using stock TU pump and stock injectors. A couple low pressure fuel pump upgrades, but nobody was running port injection. So on 93 octane, we were seeing from 517 horsepower up to 550 horsepower. And then there was one individual I found that had 93 and they were also doing meth injection that got into the 600 horsepower range, which is good. And then there was one individual running E60 who got 653 horsepower, which is a very impressive number using this turbo. Now with the 6769, I was able to find 3 documented dyno examples, but the list of modifications with these dyno examples are incomplete. But there's some assumptions that we can make about what the fueling would need to be. We knew that they were on ethanol in many cases on the 2 top ones, but what ethanol content we really don't know. So as we can see, the 3 were using all different tuning options, so EcuTech, boot mod, and MHD, but were they using an intake? What intake manifold were they using? What heat exchanger? Everything was kind of left open. One specifically said that they were running port injection with 1050cc injectors, which is pretty common. And then another one, they were using port injection, but unknown the size of the injectors. So I listed the information because I thought it was good info, but it doesn't really hammer down exactly what setup they had. Only one of them listed what fuel they were using. They were using E35 and made 711 horsepower, which is really good. And then the other ones made 741 horsepower and 791 horsepower. But what ethanol content? I know it was ethanol because they said that, but they didn't say like it was E50 or it was E85. So we have to kind of guesstimate. Now, if they're running anything over E35, they're definitely going to need a low pressure upgrade. So I went ahead and plugged that in. But what upgrade it was, I'm not quite sure. Next, I want to put this data into a single list so we can see where it rack and stacks with the data we've already pulled, plus some new data we've gotten for the pure turbos. So here's the chart with all the information from lowest horsepower to highest horsepower. And if you look all the way to the right-hand side, you can see I individually listed what turbocharger was what with the power level. To make this information more digestible, I went ahead and broke the chart down into 4 separate charts. Ones that were in the 500 horsepower range, 600 horsepower, 700 horsepower, and then the ones that were over 800 horsepower. So looking at the chart of the 500 horsepower level, we can see where the UltraFlow X stacks up against the new Pure 800. Again, I think there's limited data here to really show what the performance of the UltraFlow X is truly to the new Pure 800. But as you can see here with 93 octane pump gas, the highest horsepower we saw with UltraFlow was 550 horsepower, and with the Pure 800 was 577. So relatively comparable. And then with a small upgrade as far as like running E30, the Pure 800 was able to get into the high fives, with the highest one being 591 horsepower. Now moving on to the 600 horsepower chart, you'll also see some bold font there, and that is new data I found that's different or additional from the previous video on the new Pure 800. So you can see those there. What I think is really interesting and jumps out is there's a couple instances with the UltraFlow X there, with the highest one being 653 horsepower running E60. And that's, again, that's really good power with that turbo. And it's kind of what I expected. But also what I thought was interesting was I was able to find a 93 octane pump gas dyno run that made 610 horsepower with the new Pure 800. I'm not sure how accurate that is. They were very excited about it, how they had made 610 horsepower on pump gas with the new Pure 800, and I wanted to include that, but I thought that was interesting. Additionally, I was able to find a 93 octane Pure 900 setup, and that one made 670 horsepower. So the idea that a turbo like the Pure 900, or in Dynamic Autowerx case, a 6769, might be able to make into the 600s with pump gas. Granted, I didn't see anything in this section of where there's 6769s. They were, again, very limited amount of data, but those pump gas numbers made by the Pure 800 and the Pure 900 were very impressive. But I think the UltraFlow X does a good job of being comparable to the Pure 800 in this particular case. So now looking at the 700 horsepower range chart, we can see some new data points there for the new Pure 800, but also data points plugged in with the 6769. So we can kind of see a good mixture here, different builds and different setups making power with the Pure 800 or the Pure 900, and then also the 6769 making power in this same range. And then finally moving on to the 800 horsepower and up chart, there's only 2 data points there, one new one with the Pure 900 making 883 horsepower with E70 and methanol. Very impressive, but I wasn't able to find anything with the 6769 that made in the 800 and up horsepower range. So with all that info, you can kind of see what power was achieved with these turbo upgrades. Going back to the Dynamic Autowerx turbos, they claim that they support power of 730 plus horsepower on the Ultraflow X and then 875 plus horsepower on the 6769. We simply don't have enough data to dispute or back up those claims. I don't dismiss their claim at all. I think it's really just due to the limited amount of data in the field. I was able to find numerous instances of people having these turbos, but they weren't doing dyno runs, which I can understand. Dyno time is expensive and it has to make sense for what you're doing with your build. So when they make those claims, I don't think that they're outlandish. It's just I wasn't able to find any data to support those particular numbers. The data was just too limited. So with all that being said, I have two conclusions that I feel very confident in. The new Pure 800 and the Ultraflow X are very similar turbos with similar performance capabilities. I personally lean more towards the new Pure 800 for this, but they're very similar turbochargers. Second, on paper, the 6769 should outperform the Pure 900. Again, limited data, but the Pure 900 is a very impressive turbocharger. And when you see similar modifications between the Pure 900 and the 6769, which was, again, limited data, they were making similar power. The Pure 900 made good power on 93 octane and also a very impressive power numbers over 850 horsepower. But I think this is a similar area where the 6769 is going to operate. But again, looking at the data, I tend to lean towards the Pure 900 to make power in these areas. So overall, I think the Dynamic Autowerx turbos are good turbos. They're quality turbos. So I don't want to bash them. I lean a little more towards the Pure turbos for my personal build. But I hope I was able to kind of help you with your turbo upgrade decision making. Also, the charts that I use in this video, I have them posted up on my Facebook page. So just go to my Facebook page. A link to that is in the description, and you can actually get those charts so you can look at them. But if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to Grumpy Vet Garage, liking this video, sharing this video. We also have a Grumpy Vet Garage merch store. Link to that store is in the video description. We have t-shirts, hoodies, pullover, and zip up. So by all means, get something for yourself. It really helps out the channel to grow. If you want to contact me, you can do that through the video description here on YouTube, but also you can contact me through Facebook or Instagram. Links to my Facebook and Instagram are in the video description. But as always, thanks for coming and seeing me in my garage. And until next time, have a good one.